Okay, hello everyone. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you again so much for being here tonight. We want to welcome you to this event, People's History of Resistance to Militarism in San Diego and beyond. Please, I know we don't have quite enough chairs. That's a good problem to have because struggles around the world. San Diego is one of the many geographies that has been inspired by the Zapatistas. For 20 years now, community organizations and individuals have come together to organize Enero Zapatista, a month-long series of events that commemorate the Zapatista uprising on January 1st, 1994. These events also seek to link local movements and address local struggles. This event here tonight is part of the 20th annual Enero Zapatista in San Diego. San Diego is considered to be one of the most militarized cities in the U.S. U.S. militarism has made its way into the fabric of this region, so much that it has become naturalized. Military bases, border militarization and surveillance, weapons manufacturing and industry, school militarization, and the recruitment of racialized youth all converges here to carry out war, death, and dispossession locally and abroad. But San Diego also has a long history of resistance to militarism. And victories and successful campaigns have been a model for others across the country. The speakers that we invited to this event tonight will share some of these histories of resistance and their own experiences with militarism. We also hope that you will reflect on your own experiences with militarism and perhaps, more importantly, on how we will continue to combat militarism here in San Diego. So before we get started, again, I have a couple announcements. We have bathrooms here around the corner. We have catering by Baraka and Bilal of United Women of East Africa Support Team. That's going to be a little bit, give them a round of applause. That is going to be ready later this evening. Please, well, when it's time, you can feel free to help yourself to the delicious food that we have tonight. We're also, I want to say that we're hosting this event here in this space while there's an ongoing art exhibition by Evan Apolaka and his Secret City project. So let's give it up for Evan. Big shout out to Evan. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm gonna actually now pass it over to Evan so he can introduce himself for those of you that don't know him and to introduce our first speaker. And just before I do that, actually, I just wanna briefly review what the night is gonna look like. We're gonna have 7 speakers come up and share different perspectives on militarism. And then afterward, we're gonna split up into smaller groups and we're gonna give everyone the opportunity to engage more intimately with one of the 7 speakers and have some discussions in small group sessions. And then we'll come back together as a big group and just have folks share out their reflections with the whole group. So again, we're honored that you're here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. And I'll pass it over to Evan.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. I guess to say first that for me it's like a dream come true to have these conversations with all of you that I know, people I don't know. You know, it's years in the making, not just like the organization of this event, but I would also say, you know, multiple generations of this kind of work and these kinds of conversations. And I think the people that are going to be speaking to you all tonight will really reflect that. and that we'll be learning from each other, from the past, from the present. I had to really ask myself, what does a people's history of resistance to militarism mean? And I think not only focusing on history, right, like commemoration, romanticizing a past, but to think of this moment as history as something that is ongoing, that we all participate in and contribute to. And also thinking of a people's history as, we have presenters here, but we want it to be really a participatory sort of experience, so the presenters will really short segments at the end of it, and so we're going to have sort of different segments where really incite dialogue that is as a result of what is presented today. People's history based on like all of our contributions together. And so let me just start by introducing our first speaker, Teresa Cerda, who was an organizer at the age of 16 with the MDM, Movement for a Democratic Military in Oceanside, which sounds really strange in this day and age, but to be organizing with Marines on Camp Pendleton, who had their own organizing space in the middle of Oceanside. I'm just going to leave it really brief and let Teresa share some of her stories here. And so if you can come up. Do you want to come up? No, yeah, come up and we'll kind of... We wanted to kind of keep it this sharing session is kind of like based on questions that we had for Teresa. So we wanted to ask, what was MDM? What were sort of the objectives and the goals that the MDM was deciding that we're making active? Could you share with us?
Well, MDM was really an oxymoron. It was Movement for a Democratic Military. And nothing is democratic in the military. And at that time, we had our guys, the Marines, actually name it that and strive towards that. Meanwhile, our goal was to, my water please, I'm so sorry, our goal was to help these guys not go to Vietnam and to do it in a way that was visible and not dangerous for them. We had about 3,000 guys take off to Canada for CO, which is conscientious objections. But really, the ones that could not really be considered conscientious objectors were people of color. And so the Green Machine, which fostered MDM, also fostered the Black Unities, which was for Black Marines and Brown Marines. So our goal was to keep them from going to Vietnam and letting them be the voice, the front voice of the anti-war movement. Because before it had just been college students, fringe culture people like hippies and liberal elites. So we said, who should we have speak for them other than themselves? So they led a march of 4,000 people. They were in the front, group of Marines, huge group of Marines, I don't remember how many. And they started the movement for military anti-war. It was going on across the place, but because we were so close to Camp Pendleton, and you think of Marines as being this, that bulldog picture that they usually have on the USMC, worried that we weren't going to get anybody, but they just couldn't wait to have their voice heard.
You want to share what was the publication that you all were putting out and distributing?
Oh, okay. The publication was called Attitude Check, which is a military term that the officers would use towards the GIs, the Marines, when they wanted to call them on anything. They'd say, okay, time for an attitude check. So that's why they named the newspaper Attitude Check. And the military had a history of being green. That's why we got the name the Green Machine. And everybody was green. Whoops. Everybody was green, but some people were darker green and lighter green. So the darker green Marines sat in the back, and the lighter green Marines sat in the front. You get my drift? There was total racism, and it was fostered by those in charge because it kept the Marines at a level where they couldn't organize and unite against the machine.
And maybe,
Oh.
yeah, if you could share a little bit about some of the demonstrations that you all held.
Actually, the biggest one was, I believe, in April. I don't remember a whole lot because I'm so old now, but the biggest demonstration we had was, like I said, 4,000 people. We had Angela Davis, we had Tom Hayden, who had been part of the Chicago 7 folks on trial, and Black Panthers, they spoke. By the way, I got to go to the Black Panthers headquarters in LA, and I was so impressed. They had free breakfast for kids, they had school, they had culture events. And I think about them as the pioneers of the free breakfast programs that the schools have now, because you can't study, you can't pay attention if you're hungry. So anyway, so some of the marches we had, they were called moratoriums, some were called anti-war marches, whatever. But this big one that we had, folks jumped off the sidewalk and joined us. They were just standing on the sidelines watching, and all of a sudden, they joined us. And we were afraid because Oceanside is a heavy military town. In fact, my grandparents owned land at Camp Pendleton, and they were kicked off to build Camp Pendleton, the whole eminent domain thing. So it has a history of not being very nice to people of color. And anyway, I'm not sure what else besides those big ones.
Yeah, I mean, this is an image of, they had 2 demonstrations. This is an image of one. So just to preface, I learned about MDN through folks that have been around in San Diego for many years doing this kind of work, and it just struck me to even know that this kind of movement was happening and was very strong in Oceanside, but was really a part of a larger, what they call GI movement, right? And this is also at a time when there was a draft. And so someone put me in contact with Teresa, and we met up, and we actually found the house that they used to organize at, the Green Machine, and which was very close to downtown Oceanside, and so we were able to film some material in there, sort of retracing some events that happened there, and including, strolling around downtown Oceanside. But just to say, these images are from San Diego Union Tribune, their archives, which are at the San Diego History Center here in the Lowell Park. So I'm going to go to the next, and maybe if you could share about some of the events that happen as kind of a result of some of the work.
Organizing. My role as a 16-year-old, still in high school, was to leaflet the downtown. We used to call it leafletting. leaflet the downtown and invite folks to come to the Green Machine. And it was close, but they still needed a ride, so I became the taxi, pick them up and bring them. Well, and then also, some of them had to get back to the base by a certain time, or they would be considered AWOL. And some had passes to be able to stay out. Well, this particular evening, the meeting was over, the guys had had their meeting, and I took a carload of Marines and back to the front gate of the base, Camp Pendleton. But as I was leaving, I had this weird feeling that something wasn't right. And I was driving down the street to get to Highway 101, otherwise known as Hill Street, to get to the front gate. Anyway, I saw cop cars, 4 of them, one on each corner of the entrance that would block off our MDM house, our Green Machine house. And I kept thinking, what are they doing there? So I went and I dropped the guys off at the base, turned around and came home. The next day, I got a call from one of the ladies that lived at the house, Elena, and she said, don't come today. We were machine gunned. And so the house was full of bullets, riddled. And for me, personally, the scary thing was where I was sitting, I had my back against the window, was where the bullets came through. So I escaped that, and I wonder to this day if the police, I'm still saying that they did it. I have no proof. But I'm wondering to this day if they didn't want me to become a high school martyr or something because, or add fuel to the flame of the growing movement, because they waited until I left. And that was a pretty scary, I mean, nowadays, drive-bys, drive-bys. This was not a drive-by. This was orchestrated and carried out. And Brother Jesse, you've seen the picture, he was the one who got shot. And he got shot here, and the bullet spun him around, and again he got shot in the shoulder. So after that, we did what we thought we were supposed to do, and that was sandbag the entrance. And sandbag up to I don't know what, and have nightly guard watch. And the guys, the GIs, I never held a gun in my life. They started teaching me how to use a gun. And I don't like guns, even to this day, and shotguns. And they'd take me out to a range and have me shoot, knowing in the back of my head that I couldn't do that. You know, unless I really had to, I could not use the gun. But they were so confident in me and so caring and wanted to make sure I would never get hurt. They took me out and showed me how to use it. To this day, I don't know how to use a gun. I don't want to.
Thank you. I think it's really important to share, these aspects of these struggles, really, and to keep these stories alive. These stories really only exist through oral history, and to be able to witness them, is, I think, really special. And I wanted to end it by sharing something that Teresa told me. Maybe your daughter or your granddaughter had asked you what was good about all this, and that it was, really this whole movement, this GI movement, we can say resulted in the shift of the approach to enlistment and to draft, ending the draft and then shifting to basically, what we can later see as like ROTC, these focusing on kids of color and low-income communities to sort of convince them to enlist, so seeing how those methods have shifted over time from an era that was different, right? So I just want to thank you, Vanessa, for sharing these stories. We have to move on to the next person, but thank you.
May I say one last thing, which I feel remiss that I didn't? I just want us to acknowledge that we are living on borrowed land from our indigenous people here, and that is from Canada all the way down and across to Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii. So we all need to acknowledge that we are living and breathing and profiting from stolen land.
Okay, thank you so much, Teresa, once again. I get to introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is going to share some words with us tonight. Is Rick Jankow. Rick Jankow is a founding member of the Committee Opposed to Militarism and the Draft, also known as COMD, and the Project on Youth and Non-Military Opportunities, Project Yano. Anybody that knows Rick knows that he's committed himself completely to combating militarism here in San Diego and beyond. And I personally met Rick when I was in high school at Mission Bay High School and being targeted by the military. He was extremely influential in my own trajectory as an activist that fights militarism. So Rick Jankow.
Thank you, Ducky. By the way, I visited the Green Machine. Yes. Handed out leaflets downtown Oceanside at nighttime, inviting people to come and listen to Jane Fonda. Some of you know how risky that must have been if you know the history of Jane Fonda's relationship with the military. But I'm so happy that you were here. I had a page and a half of notes, which I apparently misplaced. So I hope you'll bear with me. This is going to be a test for me to recall the things that I was thinking of mentioning. I'm not going to be able to cover it all, and maybe it'll be less than. No, oh, sorry. But somebody else lost their notes, apparently. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to give you some history, some chronology, and it's just a way to maybe let you know about some of the events that happened in San Diego that are examples of resistance to militarism. And these are things that I either personally was connected to or I observed them. So I'm going to get started with the first. In 1979, Congress was debating bringing back the draft. This was after it had been stopped because of Vietnam War protests and student protests in 1973. It had ended, but they were talking about bringing it back. So a small group of us who had been involved in the movements of the 60s and early 70s, we got together and decided, we needed to organize. And so that's when we formed the Committee Opposed to Militarism and the Draft, except it wasn't called that then. At that time, it was called the Committee Against Registration and the Draft, or CARD. There was a national card, and it was so we were a chapter. And most of the time, we focused on lobbying and organizing lobbying, and the bill that had been proposed was defeated. So we were all of a sudden all dressed up and nowhere to go, but we looked around and talked to each other and decided that there's always a chance this is going to come back again. So we decided to keep the group together. And lo and behold, a year later, they began requiring young men to register with the selective service system to be drafted in the future if there were going to be a draft. So our focus at that point was on passing out leaflets and encouraging non-registration. We were encouraging resistance. And that was part of a much larger movement, a larger response. I think that there was a march at UCSD with something like 3,000 people, students. There were students at San Diego State who were mobilizing. And so we were kind of a central point to bring together various groups and collaborate. And that's what happened. 2 years later, the registration rate had stayed low. And it was so low that the government decided it's time to prosecute. So guess where they decided to pick the first person to prosecute? San Diego. And it was a calculated decision that was made by advisors to not Richard Nixon. Were they? Yeah, no, these were advisors to Ronald Reagan, come to think of it. Sorry about losing the chronology, but it was actually during the Reagan administration. And they chose a man named Benjamin Sassway, who was a student at Humboldt State. He publicly refused to register. So that's why they picked him. And what we did was, together with the National Lawyers Guild chapter in San Diego, we formed the Draft Resisters Defense Fund, which raised money and organized protests and support rallies during the time of his trial. Of course, he was convicted. This is San Diego, right? But because the attempt to use prosecutions was not triggering a huge upsurge in draft registration, the government eventually abandoned that method to coerce people into compliance, and they decided to instead rely on things like denying them student aid. But it was a small group of public resistors that had been prosecuted in various parts of the country, and Ben was just the first one. COMD continued to work. I mean, even though there were no more prosecutions, we started to do other things in the community. Mostly our focus was on youth outreach. But just to give you an example of how how much we broadened our mission, in 1983 was Ballast Point. Carol, was that right? 1983? Okay, Ballast Point. Well, there was an international call for protests against the nuclear arms race, so COMD joined groups in organizing a blockade of the entrance to the submarine base in Point Loma. And a number of COMD members were arrested, including yours truly. And that was sort of, our effort to do more than just focus on the issue of the draft. In 1984, a small group of representatives, 4 organizations actually, got together to strategize how we could more effectively counter the poverty draft. Because we understood that there's no legal draft, but there is a draft. It's an economic draft. It's one that targets people who just don't have the options that others might have, and they wind up finding, a recruiter who talks them into, well, this is a way you're going to be able to pay for college, et cetera, et cetera. You all know what I'm talking about. But we met to try to figure out how we could best address that, and that's how Project Yana was formed. Project on Youth and Non-Military Opportunities. It still exists today, and that is probably where we first met David, was when Project Yana became involved in some other activities later on. Project Yana was a departure from the peace movement in a sense, because the peace movement up until then it didn't pay enough attention to this dynamic of communities of color and low-income communities feeling there's no choice but to go in and fight our wars. And that wasn't why they were joining. It was for the economic benefits that recruiters would dangle in front of them. And so we said, you know, this is something we have to learn from the past, things we did not do that we should have done during the Vietnam War. And so Project Honor was very important because it was a step up, a big step up. And then I'm going to jump ahead to 2007. In 2007, COMD and Project Honor both were part of the Education Not Arms Coalition, which is where we met David and quite a few high school students, yes, Enrique. The Education Not Arms Coalition formed to pressure the San Diego School District to stop putting students into the junior ROTC program involuntarily and to get rid of shooting ranges. JROTC brought shooting ranges into schools. And people were pretty shocked sometimes when we told them this. That coalition was mostly led by youth of color, high school students primarily. And it worked. They succeeded. We succeeded. And we also succeeded in getting a policy restricting recruiter activities on school grounds in San Diego. So it was a huge success. Now today, just today, the situation today is that there's a focus on JROTC again because it was learned that some San Diego schools are still putting students in that program without getting their permission. And so we've succeeded in getting a policy passed by the school board to ban that, and there are copies of the policy, the resolution out on the table outside. But we're debating with the district the language of the consent form because we don't feel that they're following the actual intent of the resolution. But anyway, that's what's happening today. COMD continues to publish its newsletter, draft notices. Some of you have picked them up already. There's some outside. It's now in its 45th year. So I want to invite you all to pick up copies before you leave. Hopefully we will have enough. And think about ways that maybe you might get involved with what we're doing in the school district, especially around JROTC. Thank you all for being here. This is just an incredible turnout. Congratulations to the organizers.
Before you go, I want to give you an opportunity to briefly, at least you can show these these historical pictures that you've archived.
This was a blockade of the railroad tracks in Del Mar, which occurred in, let's see, 71. Yes, 1971, 300 or 400 people sat on the railroad tracks. Del Mar was under martial law, basically, for the rest of the day. These are people who were at the Ben Sassway trial in 1982. We had people outside the federal courthouse every day of the trial. More of the protests against prosecution. This was Ballast Point, one of the contingents that blocked the entrance to the submarine base, and I had a little more hair at that time. This was a campaign directed at active duty sailors during the Vietnam War, doing education and outreach and supporting them. And it resulted in 9 sailors refusing to get on their ship to go back to Vietnam. All the sailors took sanctuary in the church, a local church. There were a lot of protests against U.S. intervention in Central America. And this is This is some of the students who were in the Education on Arms Coalition, mostly from Mission Bay High and Lincoln. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I get to introduce the next speaker as well. Our next speaker is Anayeli Ruiz. Anayeli Ruiz is a Marine veteran. She is also a fellow Project Llano board member and has volunteered with Project Llano for over 10 years. We've known each other for a long time, but we realized today we had never met each other in person. Anayeli Ruiz, let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks. Yeah, it's crazy. I was like, we're meeting for the first time in person. I see you on Zoom like every month. Wow. But yes, thank you to David and Evan for having me here. I come to you all from Chicago, so I'm so excited to be in this nice warm weather. I was asked to talk about some of my experience being in the military and some of the recruitment tactics and kind of what I do with Project Llano. So I'm gonna try to keep it concise. But speaking of the economic draft, I was the perfect recruit, right? So I grew up in the Midwest, in a very white suburb north of Chicago. Mexican immigrant with my parents. I came here when I was just under a year old. And being first generation, I felt like disconnected from school. I felt like, I didn't have any teachers that looked like me. I, was taught a version of American history that had no one that looked like me, right? So I was the perfect candidate for recruiters. Like, they literally didn't have to do any work. I sought them out. And yet still my recruiter promised me Red Lobster after I did my my ASVAB, which never happened, by the way. I still haven't gone to Red Lobster to this day, but I remember sharing that I'd never been there, and he was like taking me to Chicago to take the ASVAB. He was like, oh, well, after you sign up and do all this and that, I'm gonna take you as a treat. Yeah, that never happened. But so I joined thinking, at that time being naive, and to me college was just something like I didn't know how to apply, I didn't know the first thing of going to college, nor did I think that was something for me. I thought that was something for, the affluent students in my school. My counselors weren't really helpful, they didn't really explain how college worked or even inquired if that was something I wanted to do if I needed help with that. So to me it was like, at the time, a no-brainer, because I also felt like, I was like, I want to get out of here, I want to see the world, like I felt like I wanted to do something bigger than myself, right, which is a common thing for a lot of military folks, that they're like, I want to do something good, not realizing, how much damage is caused. And so I went in, I remember being told, I was sitting down with the recruiter and my mom, and him saying, the recruiter telling my mom that it's a possibility she could get deployed, but, it's not for sure. Oh, it was a for sure. It's like 99% that most people in the military at that time were deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. So within my first year, so I came here to San Diego in 2007, and then early spring, and by 2008 I was going to Iraq. But so some of the things I also wanted to share was, for me, like seeing, there was racism, of course, but for me what stood out mostly was the misogyny, the sexism, the sexual harassment that happened every day. Like, when I look back and I think back on the stuff that I went through on a daily basis, like, it's just unfathomable for me to, like, now that I've worked in such healthier environments and have support, I just, like, the whole military would have been canceled by now, hopefully, right? Like how we were like just treated day in and day out, and I just like, I'm like, I can't believe the stuff that I put up with, right? But I didn't have an outlet, I didn't have support. So within my first year of being in San Diego, I was sexually assaulted by a lot of Marines. And when my chain of command found out, they blamed me, and they said, well, what were you thinking? Why did you go to that party? Like, what did you think was gonna happen? And it was just so like humiliating. And after that, I put my head down, and I realized like, I joined the military thinking that, I would finally have a support system, and that I was joining a brother and sisterhood like my recruiter told me. I thought, I didn't have that support growing up. I didn't really have a good relationship with my father, and so I thought I was doing something and joining kind of this group that would have my back. And at that point, it was like, oh, I have to watch my back from my fellow Marines. And so went to Iraq, and the environment out there was worse. Just like, people coming up behind, rubbing my shoulders, or like trying to tickle me, and when I'd be like, stop, like they would turn it around on me and be like, what's wrong with you? Like, did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Just things like that, just on a daily basis, that completely unacceptable. And then coming back, to me it was like, I have less than 2 years left. I'm thinking about, I need to get out. But going in, the Marine Corps was plan A, period. That's what I thought I was going to do for 25 years and retire. Like, that was my only plan, and I was like, shit, like, what am I going to do now? And because of that first sexual assault, I started taking college courses, which, by the way, they were not very supportive of. Whenever I was done with my work, I would try to do some of my homework, and they were like, what are you doing? And so that kind of opened my eyes to seeing that, like, wait, what am I doing with my life? And that was when I first started, like, realizing that college was attainable, and it was something that just completely shifted my views. And a year before I got out, I was also raped by one of my superiors. And at that point, it was just like, for me, I was like, I'm done. Who am I supposed to tell? Who am I supposed to talk to? If the first time it happened, I was blamed, right? And so for me, it was, I still thought about like maybe staying in, but I was like, I can't, like, my soul will not, I can't do this. If I stay, I'm literally doing it for the money, for no other reason than just to survive, right? And they try to re-recruit you, try to tell you that, like, oh, what are you gonna do when you get out? And I was like, well, I'm gonna use my JIA bill. Oh, that's what they all say, right? Make you kind of doubt yourself, and it works for a lot of people. They re-enlist even though they don't want to, but they're like, well, we have free healthcare, we have a roof over our head, free food, So those re-recruitment tactics really do work on a lot of people. But for me, I was like, I cannot put up with this. So I got out, and in those years afterward, going to San Diego Community Colleges is where I met a lot of folks that I got connected to Project Yano, and I was like, oh my God, I just exist. So when they asked me to volunteer, I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I wish I had someone from Project Yano that, when I was in the Midwest, come talk to me and tell me what I was really getting myself into. So I always loved talking to young folks, and I did a lot of activism work afterward, and to me that was like a million times more gratifying, and talking to young students about militarism, civic engagement, and stuff like that I did, than any other stuff I did while I was in my 4 years in the Marine Corps. So just really quick, some of the things that projects that I've done with Project Yano was like review JROTC textbooks that they use with students, that a lot of times it has propaganda in there. So just highlighting and pointing out all the false historical alternatives that they throw in there. And then also writing some pieces for the COMD draft notices and things like that for fundraising for Project Yano, and then of course the stuff that's happening across, not just in San Diego, but across the country, where students are being automatically enrolled, and it's also happening in Chicago, and folks are organizing out there for that as well. So, but yeah, that's 8 minutes of my 4 years until now. Yeah, thank you.
I forgot about these pictures, but yeah, I always show. These are some old pictures. This one was in Iraq, and this one was in Iraq. But a lot of people, even when I go to the VA, you know, like assume I'm the spouse or something, or I'm the so. And I once during Occupy Wall Street, I protested in my dress blues, and I had people out there like, are you a real Marine? And I'm like, no, I'm just wearing a costume, like for fun. But yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Anayeli. Anayeli actually flew from Chicago this weekend specifically for this event to come and share her words. So I want to introduce Enrique, who's going to introduce our next speaker. But Enrique has also been key to putting this event on tonight. Enrique de la Cruz, who I'm sure, he's been doing this work forever. He's part of the Colectivo Zapatista. That's where we met. So a big round of applause for Enrique.
Sure, I'm going to bring it down. So good evening, everyone. My name is Enrique, Colectivo Zapatista. David makes me feel like I'm Yoda when he says that. But so I'm going to introduce our next speaker. His name is Pedro Rios, really cool guy, down to earth. You can talk to him, meet him. He's a director for American Foreign Service Committee, the San Diego U.S.-Mexico Border Program Office. So give it up. He's going to be talking about breaking down the militarization of the border here, where we're at, right? So give it up for Pedro.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pedro Rios. Thank you, Enrique and David, and even and Colectivo Zapatista. Really, 20 years ago, I think, had the vision of bringing the Zapatista movement here to San Diego, and so it's been wonderful to see year after year and reaching 2 decades of this work and bringing the principles of Zapatismo here. So I'm going to take it back in terms of border militarism to back in 1994, which coincides with some of the strategies that Border Patrol used and that continue to be implemented in different ways. So back in 94, when NAFTA was being contemplated, actually years before that, but when NAFTA then gets passed and approved, and the Zapatistas they take up arms and they are struggling and they raise a lot of questions for a lot of us who at that time were thinking about the contradictions that we were living at the time. And at the same time, we were seeing an increased need for the U.S. government to, what they considered a need to militarize border communities. And in El Paso, what we saw first was an operation that intended to apply what they call territorial denial. So denying migrants the ability to go into the U.S., to come into the U.S., and seek better opportunities for themselves. It was that operation called Hold the Line that in 1993 that then got adopted in San Diego, first to the San Diego sector, and that includes about 60 miles from the Pacific Ocean going east, and that then became Operation Gatekeeper. And Operation Gatekeeper, we might imagine it as being manifested through the construction of border walls, and oftentimes when we talk about the militarization of border communities, we only envision the symbolic or the symbolism of border walls, but really militarization goes way before that. From the use, for instance, of land demands from the First Gulf War and from the Vietnam War that then became part of the border walls. And so our government recycles by using these landing mats to then build symbols of exclusion and that prevent people from who are seeking safety and fleeing harm from finding that safe harbor in the U.S. Not to say that they would find it, but that's how the narrative usually goes. Moving forward then, well, a lot of communities here in San Diego started resisting the presence of increased boots on the ground and technology and the use of Department of Defense strategies. And so part of this deterrent strategy was incorporating what was then used in the Pentagon to fight against counterinsurgency movements in other parts of the world. And so, for instance, when the Pentagon, one of the aspects of the use of this strategy was to normalize violence. And so we saw this growing up in San Isidro and more closer to the border towns that were more closer to the physical barrier between the U.S. and Mexico. And so when I was a child, for instance, and some of you might have played tag as kids. Some of us played Trice, La Trice, you might remember that. But some of us also played pretending that the one who was it was actually a Border Patrol agent who was then chasing after the boyos, or people that needed to be tagged. This is a game I played as a child, and so the psychological impact of militarization was manifesting in the way that as children we played these childhood games. And it took years before I remembered that or recalled that memory, and it gave me a pause to think, wow, we were incorporating this militarization into our psychosis in such a way where we were playing it as a childhood game. And so I think that it says a lot to how we were then manifesting what we were seeing on the ground. And I did leave San Diego for a few years, and in that time that I was away, the level of militarization just increased. And increased even much more in the series of wars that border policies get developed under. And so we can go back to the Nixon years and even Carter. The first border wall that was built under President Carter, and it was called the Tortilla Curtain. And some of you might remember that from way back then. But the manifesting of these wars, whether it's the war on drugs, or whether it's the war on people considered to be criminals, or whether it's the war on terror, or whether it's the spillover violence that President Obama tried to push away from the war on terror, but then pointed toward the spillover violence, or whether it's the movement towards fascism that we saw during the Trump administration, and adopting now similar policies under the Biden administration to the consideration of imposing the Insurrection Act as being talked about under the possibility of a second term under Trump. What we are continuing to see are how all these policies are landing on top of each other and don't allow an opportunity for people to present something that might be different in terms of the narrative of how border policies are being defined. But for our communities, in terms of what our resistance has looked like, we continue to offer a vision that is counter to militarization. And sometimes what that means is confronting the symbolism, confronting the agents that are upholding that militarization. And so one example I want to give is in 2018, especially when we were seeing children that were being separated from their families, again used as a deterrent mechanism. And when Jeff Sessions was at Friendship Park and he announced the zero tolerance policy that would lead towards separating children from their parents, the symbolism there was exactly that, right? Using a deterrent strategy again to prevent people, in this case who were seeking asylum, from actually having that legal right recognized to to seek asylum. And so we had an idea of saying, what if we bring faith leaders to the border and to question the lack of moral compass that the Trump administration had at that moment, and to assert that our communities are spiritually bound and that our communities have the moral authority to say children belong with their parents, and that we seek to bring back dignity to our communities. And so that, my time is up, but I just want to show one photo. There it is. So we brought 400 faith leaders with the idea that we wanted to conduct a water ceremony right at the border. And Border Patrol prevented our ability to reach the border wall to conduct the water ceremony, and they arrested around 31 or so. State parks then declared an unlawful assembly, and so they threatened to arrest everyone else. But the idea there was to showcase that the people that were organized had the moral authority to and the audacity to say, we demand our dignity to be upheld in this area here, Friendship Park, that we recognize being a part of the people, and that with that, the vision that one day these walls will fall. And I would want to extend that. And I want to extend that as we're organizing for getting rid of these walls and the symbolism that they represent within the larger militarization complex, that there are more walls that are being built around the world in other regimes. So extend that call of taking these walls down, not only here on our border, the wall of separation that separates families in Palestine, the newer walls that are coming up between the DR and other communities there and around the world. So the last point is this struggle here locally is connected to the struggles abroad, because that's how power is moving, and so that's how our people power must move as well. So thank you.
So I just want to thank Retro for speaking tonight. I think if it's not clear already, the goal of this event is to have all of these conversations in the same room, right? And we're not only bridging different generations, we're bridging different areas of the movement that are, at the end of the day, truly connected, right? And so I want to introduce Jackie from Anakbayan, San Diego.
Hello, my name is Jackie. And I'm part of Anakbayan San Diego, which is a youth and student organization fighting for national democracy and genuine liberation in the Philippines. I wasn't exactly sure like what the structure of this was, so it's kind of like speech-like, but I'm just going to read the points. Thank you. And there's going to be some flyers being passed around about something that I'll talk about at the end called RIMPAC. But yeah, as I said, I'm a member of Anakbayan San Diego, and I just want to say it's like a big honor to like be up here. I'm very humbled to be speaking at the same time as like long-time like San Diego community members who have been in the community and know so much about like the rich history here. So it's really an honor, and I really look up to y'all. But yeah, I'm going to be talking a bit about the relationship between the United States and the Philippines when it comes to militarism, but not only just like the U.S. as a whole, but like us here in San Diego as well. So yeah, this is not like super relevant right now, but like I'll point to that later. But yeah, as many folks know, the Philippines was originally a colony of the United States. And despite this, the Philippines has a really rich history and legacy of resistance against colonization, as well as just like foreign domination in the country. So yeah, the Philippines used to be a colony of the United States, but even when it was granted its independence, you know, we could see that it was not truly free from like the grasp of the United States, and we can see that through the military agreements between the two countries. The first being the Mutual Defense Treaty that was made in like 1951, and it was shortly after this that the Vietnam War happened. That folks have been talking about today, and the resistance against that here in San Diego today. And due to the Mutual Defense Treaty, it basically said, we're friends, so if someone, hurts us, you gotta jump in and help us too, So essentially it's guaranteeing the US access to like troops in the Philippines, to like the Filipino people to be used as like pawns in their war games. And that's like when we really see not only protests erupting here, for troops in the US not to be sent over there, but also Filipinos protesting against, their people being sent for wars that they had nothing to do with, But yeah, we also see basically the semi-colonial nature of the Philippines in relation to the US through the Visiting Forces Agreement, which was created in 1999. Essentially giving more military access to the US in the country of the Philippines, allowing there to be US military bases in the country. And we know that throughout the history of colonization in the Philippines from the US, the Philippines has always really been a geopolitical strategic point for the US, even now, right? With the US ramping up its war against China, it really uses the Philippines as a strategic point for that. But yeah, so we went over the Mutual Defense Treaty and the Visiting Forces Agreement. And one last agreement that I'll talk about is EDCA, so Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. So through EDCA, similarly, it basically allows, again, U.S. military on Philippine soil. And even though the previous president Duterte threatened to get rid of the Visiting Forces Agreement, it essentially did nothing. And it was actually last year that they implemented 4 new U.S. bases in the Philippines under the current Bongbong Marcos regime. So we can see here, a map of the bases being built, as well as all of the EDCA sites that are currently in the Philippines. But of course, we know that at the beginning of EDCA, and also with the recent addition of new bases, the people did not just allow this to happen, right? People really protested this. Both here and in the Philippines. Even though the government tried to hide that this was happening, the people did not let it happen easily. And we're still fighting against these bases that really violate the sovereignty of the Philippines, right? But, sorry, let me get my place here. In talking about wars abroad and the US and the Philippines, it's important to know that, as we know, the strategies being used against people are only intensifying and are only getting worse. And the cooperation between the Philippines and the US is also only intensifying because the difficulties between, the people in the Philippines who are really being neglected by their government and are facing these hardships, it's really coming out, and people are starting to realize just how today we're realizing, and more people are starting to realize in San Diego about the issue with the militarism in our community, right? And the people really are starting to fight against that more and more. And of course, the U.S. doesn't like that for its, for its interests, and not only for its geopolitical interests, but for the interests of U.S. foreign corporations. So much land in the Philippines is owned by U.S. foreign corporations. And I'm talking a lot, and time goes by really fast, and I did not go over every point I wanted to. So I'm going to take the last of these 2 minutes to highlight one last thing. I don't know if anyone's ever heard, but another form of U.S. and Philippine collaboration with military are called Balikatan exercises, and they happen every year. And it's essentially the U.S. military training the armed forces of the Philippines and even the Philippine National Police in tactics to oppress their own people. And the U.S. sends millions of dollars for military aid. And we as Anagbayan really call against this aid because we know that it's being used by the government to suppress the people's activism against the corruption. And this year, the Balikatan exercises are actually emphasizing more like on naval strategies, which is pretty relevant because this year, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of RIMPAC. It's the Rim of the Pacific exercises, but they happen every other year, and they happen in Hawaii. And this year, they're actually being hosted by San Diego's the 3rd Fleet, which is based in Point Loma. So here in San Diego, it's really important for us to see what's happening with the military, with the military moving. These are the largest maritime warfare exercises, so they're literally training for war. And the Philippines is a part of this, the US, Israel, as well as Mexico and so many other countries. And they're basically, training with tactics for war and to repress, like, the people's struggles, right? So, Anagbayan San Diego is taking up a campaign against RIMPAC this year, which is happening in June. And so we join all those who are against militarism and wanna contribute to a campaign against RIMPAC to join us in investigating the situation and opposing it and really truly calling it out for what it is, which is an exercise of violence and an exercise for profit and of exploitation. I'm sorry that was kind of everywhere, but I appreciate y'all for listening.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's really important to have, an understanding what's happening in our own backyard and how that connects to everywhere else in the world, And so we're gonna move on to talk about our own backyard and specifically on the UC campuses here in California and in San Diego. So we're gonna bring Riley up to the stage here.
Hapaday, everyone hear me? Okay, buenas and hapaday kodas hamzu. My name is Riley Taiping-Fong. I'm an academic researcher. I spent 7 years at UC San Diego, where I got my PhD in the Department of Communication. And I'm grateful to be here to talk to you today about a paper I wrote with a friend and colleague of mine, Professor Tiara Naputi, who's at UC Irvine. So the impetus for this paper really comes from some of our shared experiences in higher ed. We're both communication scholars. We're both connected to University of California campuses, and we're both Chamorro, so we're indigenous to the Mariana Islands, specifically the island of Guam or Guam, which is also heavily impacted by the U.S. military. And so when Tiara moved to Irvine, we got talking about how the U.S. military is so present in our everyday lives, not only living in heavily militarized zones in Southern California, but also on our campuses, which have long histories of collaboration with the U.S. military, and which bear the legacies of militarism in a variety of ways, including contamination and a variety of financial relationships which really wed the Department of Defense with science and technology research. And so we wrote a paper about confronting ignorance around militarism in the UC system and in higher ed more broadly. And it turns out, if you want to understand the interconnected ways that universities maintain U.S. empire and maintain the U.S. war machine, there are no shortage of examples at UC Irvine and UC San Diego. And so I'll spend the next few minutes previewing a few things from our paper that really address our larger question which is what are the stories, what are the histories we need to surface as educators in order to disrupt ignorance around militarism on our campuses. Okay, so first we need to start by recognizing that universities largely exist because of the stealing of indigenous lands and because of the wealth accumulated from that theft. One way to interrogate this history is through the examination of land-grant universities. These date back to the 1862 signing of the Morrill Act by President Lincoln, and this worked by turning land that had been expropriated from tribal nations into seed money for higher education. In total, the Act redistributed nearly 10.8 million acres from more than 250 tribal nations for the benefit of 52 colleges in the United States, including the University of California. The Morrill Act is widely lauded for opening up public education to more people, but until recently it was not recognized that its larger purpose was also to encourage settler expansion into the West. High Country News did an amazing project to create an interactive database around land-grant universities, which is where I learned that the University of California was created through the sale of some 150,000 acres of indigenous land. I also learned that when land-grant universities were created, they had specific criteria about what was to be taught in these universities, and military science was one of 3 major areas of focus, along with agriculture and mechanical science. And so settler colonialism and militarism are intimately linked right down to the very formation of our universities. Our universities are built on stolen lands, and they also house thousands of stolen ancestors. And today, our universities are falling very short on their responsibilities under federal law to repatriate indigenous remains and cultural artifacts. UCSD had one repatriation case go all the way to the Supreme Court, yet today, they and San Diego State University still have thousands of indigenous artifacts mandated for return under federal law. ProPublica recently launched an amazing tool about Native remains in universities and museums, which exposed that UC Berkeley has the remains of some 4,900 Native ancestors that they've not yet made available for return. And so in a moment when our universities are increasingly adopting land acknowledgements, there's clearly a lot of work still to be done to make good on concrete actions like repatriation. And as conversations on settler colonialism sort of take shifting tacks and gain visibility across our universities, I think we also need to be recognizing how militarism figures into this picture. And so we can start by calling into question the sort of everydayness of militarism in our places. These are probably all sites that you're familiar with. There's the abandoned blimp hangar at Tustin Marine Corps Air Station. There's the San Onofre nuclear power plant. There's the air station at Miramar. And the bottom is a photo that I took of a Marine recruitment booth at the Pacific Islander Festival Association, the Festival PIFA, which is held every summer at Ski Beach. I would love to get Project Yano to have a booth like right next to them, or like ideally instead of them. So let's link up after this. And so something we can do as educators is push our analysis onto these seemingly commonplace infrastructures and practices, ask about their histories, and understand their legacies. And so in doing some of this research around UCSD, I learned that the campus we know today as UC San Diego originated as a military training grounds known as Camp Matthews. Some 400 acres in the southeast end of campus are designated as formerly used defense sites, where inspections have found soil contamination and debris from military munitions. And so you don't have a campus that began through collaboration with the US military without finding many other vestiges of this relationship. Researchers at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography have worked closely with the US military since 1930, studying things like nuclear weapons testing and submarine warfare. UC San Diego is a major recipient of funding from the Department of Defense for science research, having received some $100 million in 2019 alone. And in that same fiscal year, 2019, The broader UC system received some $22 million in total net fee revenue for co-managing two of the largest nuclear weapons laboratories in the nation. In these and so many other ways, the U.S. military shapes the economy and research priorities at our universities. And so, in the last few minutes, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts in line with this event's theme of resistance. Students, staff, faculty across our universities are engaged in all kinds of grassroots efforts to research, write, and organize against militarism in higher ed. This slide shows an op-ed written by a student at UC Santa Barbara exposing our university's relationships to nuclear weapons, and a new project from Decolonizing Nuclear Studies that provides educational modules that are open and publicly accessible around nuclearism. Tools like those I mentioned from High Country News and ProPublica are also really effective in exposing histories of indigenous dispossession that are often excluded from our mainstream curriculum. And other works like the Cost of War project sheds light on the U.S. military's leading role in polluting the environment and driving global warming. And so in coming together today, I'm excited to also amplify the work that folks have shared up here with our students, who I think need more examples of the paths they can choose to challenge and innovate beyond these structures that cause so much violence. And so to close, I'll leave you with these images that are really symbols of resistance from our indigenous communities. These are indigenous watercrafts taking to San Diego waters. At the left, these are Kumeyaay Tule boats, and at the right, the Sapmen Chamorro. And I love these as sort of a counter image to all the military infrastructure that can seem to dominate this place, right? Because while San Diego is heavily militarized, it has for much longer been a site of indigenous resistance and innovation. Our resistance can honor the indigenous lifeways, indigenous collaborations, and stories that started long before U.S. military and will continue long after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riley. We're just going to try to keep it moving here. We really thought it was important to share and speak about this particular, not this image, but everything that goes into it. This is a map that was created called Israel's San Diego Accomplices. So this is basically a list of defense contractors from as far north as Encinitas down to the US-Mexico border, generally in the San Diego region. And there are 14 of them. But there are hundreds of defense contractors here in San Diego. And, you know, I think it's really important to be as concise and truthful with putting this kind of information out, making it public. And it's important to note that many of these companies have facilities all over the U.S. and various parts of the world. And there are many other companies, subcontractors, that contribute smaller components to the various weapons that Israel uses and that other countries use. And so a lot of this, it is very hard to pinpoint without sort of having an inside scoop of what specifically is made in San Diego that may be currently being used or that has been used in recent times, right? But the truth is that many of these companies have contracts with the state of Israel, and we can find this information a lot of times very easily, whether it be on these companies' websites, on business journals, various other studies that have taken place. So I'm presenting this not as a, someone that is like knows everything about this, right? But I'm presenting with understanding that we have to take what we can and sort of put it to use, right? I'm starting with Raytheon, also known as RTX. One of the weapons that they produce is the Iron Dome, which Israel uses to knock out rockets, missiles out of the sky before it lands, right? And so this is something that they can easily sort of like tout as a fair move, right? Because you can call it the defense industry versus like the war industry, right? And so I'm just gonna basically just move through these very quickly, and sort of show what has been found, about each of these companies. General Dynamics is one of the top 5 artillery shell producers in the U.S., if not the top producer. And they produce these 2,000-pound bombs, which lately we've been seeing used in Palestine. And let's just move through it. And then we have BAE Systems, which there are multiple locations here in San Diego, including right here in the shipyards. And what they produce are guidance systems. So a lot of the bombs or the shells that are produced are sort of classified as dumb bombs, but they're made to have additional elements added to them that add more precise target, yeah. We have MTU America, or MTU Solutions, which is a subsidiary of Rolls-Royce. And again, these are documents that are shared directly from the DoD, the Department of Defense, explicitly stating what it is that they're handing over, So in this case, the Namer tanks that we see in Gaza. What this company produces are the engines that go into these. So the MT 883 engine. That's basically how they title each of these tanks. The F-35 Lightning fighter jet. From what I understand, this may have not been a jet that was used too much previously until very recently. And again, these companies share very explicitly who they're giving these weapons to. Right. This is business, right? And in some cases, we can see this is the amounts of money that is coming to San Diego to produce these specific fighter jets. And we can also see that as a part of this industry, Israel is hungry for more high tech. This is kind of just a part of this advancement, this technological advancement that we see, and so we see these head-mounted displays, which are for pilots, specifically for the F-35 fighter jet, for pilots to be again more precise with the target. There are companies like Shield AI, which I believe was born here in San Diego, and we don't think of small components like a drone, that is specifically for gathering information, right? But these are also tools, and so it says here, named by joint U.S. and Israeli forces as the most mission-capable indoor drone in the world. NOAA 2 has proven its value in combat by bringing service members home safely to their families. We have companies like General Atomics, has multiple locations throughout San Diego, who produces the MQ-9A Reaper drone, which again, we see the new tools being used in the present moment, right, to sort of showcase and test these things. And in some cases, it's the U.S. that's flying them in Palestine. And so we just thought it was very necessary to bring this into this room, and I want to also start to transition to our next moment, because we've gone a little bit longer than we expected. We've also had more people present than we ever thought would be present. But I want to encourage you all to stick around, because what we want to do next is really open up the mic for everyone here. But before that, we want to serve food, because we have food for everyone. Definitely not enough for the amount of people that are here, again, unexpected. But after this short break, we want to invite conversations where you all can share what are your experiences of militarism, what maybe aspects have not been covered, or can you add to what has already been talked about here. And these are very difficult conversations, right? These are not easy conversations you might have with your parents, perhaps even with your friends, but this is what we really want to have happen here tonight. And so, again, we really encourage you all to stay. We recognize that we're going a little further in time than we expected, so hopefully the food will keep you around. So thank you.